Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Module 8, Communication. In today's discussion, I want to move beyond the obvious notion that communicating is essential to management. We all know that. Rather, I want to discuss how we should think about communication, how we exercise it, and how we build good communication habits. I want to stress that last word, habits. So much of what we present and what we talk about in this course is about taking the skills and knowledge that you learn, implementing them on a regular basis to the point that we don't have to think about them. We exercise them without consciously thinking about them. At that point, they become habits. So let's start by looking at how we should think about communication. This model shows that managers need to look in all directions. We must have regular communication with those above us, our supervisor, or if we're a CEO, it would be the board. Our peers in the organization, we must look laterally and communicate with our peers and external constituents. And of course, we need to communicate with our staff members. So let's take a look at these one at a time, communicating up the chain of command. It's important that you have regular communication with your supervisor. Some tips include writing a weekly report. A good habit to get into is to write a one-page, concise digest of the key developments in your department each week. I used to write this first thing Saturday morning. Our president knew to expect it every week, same time, same day, same format. Also, if you don't already do this, ask your supervisor to schedule a weekly half-hour meeting. Do everything you can to hold this meeting the same time and on the same day each week. There doesn't have to be an agenda, but you should always go to this meeting with some key points that you want to bring to the attention of your supervisor and some key answers that you're hoping to get. Certainly informal discussion, I can't stress enough the importance of informal conversation. It helps build a relationship between you and your supervisor. We call it informal because it's not structured, but it's critical to building a strong relationship. So communicating with staff. I used to like to have bi-weekly team meetings every other Monday at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. Our team would meet in person or by phone. I sent out an agenda in advance, which always included each staff member with an opportunity to speak, and they would talk about what they had done during the prior 2 weeks and what their plans are for the upcoming 2 weeks. In between those bi-weekly team meetings, we would have one-on-one meetings on alternate weeks. And these would be 15 to 30-minute short meetings, no agenda, just an opportunity to check in with each staff member. Weekly activity reports. I used to have staff members write a weekly report. I had a form which asked them to include any significant meetings, phone calls, conferences they attended, anything of relevance for each day during the week. And they would send that to me on Friday afternoon. So I had a clear sense of what had transpired during the week. And by the way, we talked about micromanagement in an earlier module. To get away from micromanagement, ask for a weekly activity report. This way you can see what staff members are doing without constantly having to ask them what they're up to. And if there's something on there that you think they ought not to be doing, you have an opportunity once a week to bring that to their attention. So I would take these weekly activity reports and compile them into my weekly report, and that's the one-page digest I mentioned a moment ago. I produced that for our president, and I would circulate it also to my peers in the organization, and I would circulate it back to our staff members. And again, informal discussion is important. I always made a habit of speaking with our team members every day. And there were times I can remember when the day would be halfway gone, and I would realize I had not said anything more than good morning to everyone. I would make a point of getting up, getting away from my computer, going over, and having some sort of conversation, whether it was business or whether it was informal chit-chat. All of it is a part of good management. This model depicts the formal reporting that I had talked about a moment ago. It shows each staff member reporting into me, and that was their individual weekly reports. I then would take those on Saturday morning, compile them into a one-page digest, which I then circulated first to our CEO and then to my peers in the organization. And I would loop that back to all of our staff members so they could see what I reported on to others in the organization. So looking laterally, if this were a course on fundraising, we would spend a lot of time on this slide, but suffice it to say it's important to, for the manager, and again I have manager here, as managers we all have frontline responsibility, whether it's on program or fundraising, in addition to our management responsibilities, but it's important to communicate through personal meetings, phone calls, emails, newsletters, and I used to write a quarterly update. We would send this out 4 times a year to our major gift donors. It was a 4-page synthesis of the key points and thoughts of our president. It was signed by the president, and our major gift donors really appreciated getting this insider update every quarter. Again, to our peers, hopefully your organization has bi-weekly team meetings, informal discussion. Most often than not, your communication with your peers will be through informal discussion. And of course, I mentioned earlier, I used to send my weekly digest to my peers so they could see what was going on inside of the Major Gifts Department. So I'm coming back to this slide just once more to emphasize the point that managers must be cognizant that communication in all directions is essential to facilitating the work process and to building solid working relationships. And I put this slide up because you might want to create your own radar screen, hopefully one that's easier to read than this one. Who are the key people you need to communicate with? Don't wait for them to pop up on your screen. In other words, don't wait for them to pop up with an email or a phone call saying, haven't heard from you in a while. Have them in front of you regularly. Check your screen regularly and change it periodically as needed. So here are some tips for effective communication. And some of these are derived from a book that I like called The 6 Fundamentals of Success. Establish a rhythm. We discussed earlier the context of having regularly scheduled meetings and regularly scheduled written reports. Stick to them. If it's important, say it twice. If your boss or a key donor says something important to you, repeat it back just to make sure that you're clear on what is to be done. Listen actively. This implies that we really pay attention to what other people are saying and we don't let our mind wander. This does not come naturally to most people, certainly not naturally to me. I need to work at it. Let your body language also show that you're attentive. Nod when you understand something, ask a question when you don't. Cut to the chase, be concise when speaking. Use the simplest language and to ask a question or make a point, and don't feel you have to explain to death what it is that you're trying to say. So many of us feel a lack of confidence in what we're saying that we feel compelled to explain it 3 different ways when in fact the other party probably understood us the first time around. If they don't understand us, they'll let you know. Stay open to other viewpoints. Always invite others to offer their thoughts, and be prepared to adjust your thinking if their idea has more merit, or if the combination of ideas has more merit. Particularly with staff members, it's always nice to say, what do you think? Respond to calls and emails within 24 hours. Now, this speaks for itself. I think nowadays people expect even quicker responses, 24 minutes. But 24 hours is still reasonable. Pick up the phone. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to really communicate with people by speaking to them. Email conversations, we think, save time. I think they're more time consuming. And they don't advance the process of building relationships. Of course, there are times when the other party would prefer an email. For example, when you need a short answer to something. You want to be respectful of their time. The point here is to be discriminating. Use emails selectively, not automatically. Informal communication, we've discussed that, how important it is. Lastly, be articulate. How you speak, how you write, the strength of your vocabulary, these are factors used by others consciously or subconsciously, fairly or unfairly, to make judgments about you. I want to offer some cautionary notes regarding email. Number one, if it's important, don't send an email. Make a phone call. If necessary, make a phone call. If the other person doesn't pick up, leave a voicemail, and then reinforce that with an email. And remember, an email sent is not an email read. Do not assume that because you sent something that the other party will have read it. Reread your emails to minimize misinterpretation. Make sure they're not open to interpretations that you don't intend. Ask yourself, could this be interpreted in a different way than I intend? Use correct grammar. Use correct grammar. We tend to get lazy with our emails because in our personal lives, poor grammar or shorthand is acceptable, and we transfer that over to the workplace. Don't fall into that bad habit. Make sure you use correct grammar. Going back to number 2, reread emails to minimize misinterpretation. This is another reason to pick up the phone call, because phone calls where your voice has some intonation, where you can emphasize certain things, leaves what you say far less open to misinterpretation than something that's written. Finally, expect your email to be forwarded. It probably won't, but you should only write only with the idea, or you should write with the idea that my email might be forwarded on to somebody else. You never know. Write emails again with the thought in mind that anyone can read this and you will not be embarrassed, or some other person will not be hurt by it. There are differing findings. I'm going to talk about body language and tone of voice. These matter too. There are differing findings on just how much these matter. This model shows that 65% of communication is nonverbal, 35% verbal. I've seen studies that show 90% is nonverbal. The important thing is that we rarely think about our body language, what our body language is saying. For example, is there pep in your step? Would you walk around the office with your shoulders hunched over, methodically walking along, or do you have pace to your walk? Do we frown when someone else expresses an offbeat idea? Do we fold our arms, signaling we're not open to the idea? Do we smile? Do we smile? I watched myself recording these modules and realized I don't smile very much talking into a computer. I assure you, when I'm in the office and when I'm in the classroom, I smile a lot more than you have seen. When was the last time you reinforced a point with a thumbs up? That little gesture, that little bit of body language means a lot. Let me add a note about touch. Touch can be a powerful communication tool and a very dangerous one. This day and age, we've become justifiably so very cautious about touch. The price we pay is the loss of a powerful communication tool. I mentioned in an earlier module my first supervisor ever, Jim Egan, and how to this day I can feel the touch of his arm on my shoulder. What it signaled to me at the time was that, although I was unaware of it, that Jim cared about me. I'm not going to offer you any advice in this area. I encourage you to read about the subject and develop an approach that will work for you and that will work in the culture of your organization. So this concludes Module 8. We covered a lot of ground. Let me summarize by saying we need to think of communication in terms of 360 degrees. It's important to develop a rhythm of communication by keeping a formal system to be augmented by informal communication. Be articulate and concise in your written and verbal communication. Be cognizant of nonverbal communication, your body language, and be cautious about how you use email. Thanks very much for your attention.